Hunter had not expected a letter on that warm June afternoon, at least not one with a careful hand, lacking a return address. He had gone for a walk on a warm Saturday. The breeze had blown through his hair and filled his nostrils with the subtle perfume of gardens and clipped grass. Life had almost felt normal again. Almost. He had opened the mailbox, finding the usual mix of bills, junk mail, and credit card offers, but one envelope was different. Everything about it screamed woman. The cream-colored stationery, the practiced handwriting, the perfect fold on the seal. He closed his eyes and drew in a breath. Tilly. Who else could it have been? He looked closer. They hadn't written much, so he wasn't sure it was hers. But it could have been her handwriting. He shook his head. He had been trying to move on, had tried to forget about her. But this changed things. For one long, brutal minute, he thought about throwing it away with the rest of the useless paper. He almost decided to. Almost. His hand shook as he felt the seal give way. His mind warned him. Nothing about this will make you happy. It is only hurt. He sat down, committed to opening it, and pulled the handwritten letter out. He had gone to her parents' house for Thanksgiving. They thought well of him, he had a good job, seemed serious about the relationship, and the two acted committed. They eyed each other and smiled on Thursday, walked hand in hand through the forest paths surrounding the house on Friday, and by Saturday night, they were wrapped in each other's arms by the fireplace. He had told her he loved her. She admitted the same. But the next day, that Sunday, he had heard from his own family. His grandfather had suffered a stroke, and there wasn't much time left. He was barely breathing, barely receptive. Hunter had to go. Perhaps his grandfather would live out the week, but they were planning the funeral, and there were inheritance issues to discuss, so that evening, he told her. Her eyes had widened, and there was a change, as if the coldness of the November evening had overwhelmed the living room where they had held each other. He was leaving in the morning, as planned, but he would be gone a while. She hadn't stopped holding him, but there was a silence, the kind of silence a woman takes on when she doesn't know how to reconcile her feelings to reality. The next morning, he had gotten up and met her at the breakfast table. She barely looked at him. "When will you be back?" she asked quietly, downcast. "December 14th, he remarked. She had nodded. When breakfast was over, he went up to the guest room he had occupied that weekend, gathered his things, and went back downstairs. She was there, knowing he was leaving. "I'll miss you," he remarked. "I'll miss you too," she had agreed, though her tone only made him half believe it. But she had put her arms around him tightly, tighter than she had ever held him. It almost took his breath away. Almost. He kissed her cheek. They said goodbye, and he left. As he had expected, he had returned on December 14th. There hadn't been many calls. He had made some effort. He called her a few times, but she didn't always answer, and when she did, it was short and uncomfortable. After a few more calls that never picked up, he stopped trying. But he was home now, and in the morning, he stopped off at the store, bought a bouquet of roses, and went to her house. "Dear Hunter, when I broke up with you, it was partly out of shock. I had gone out with a few boys before, but none of them had made me feel things. Some made me laugh, some had been fun to be around, but you were the first that made me feel the need to be with you. When you told me you had to go away, it had felt like you were leaving me forever. I know it was only a couple of weeks, but in that moment that felt like an eternity. The day you left, all I did was cry. I cried for the rest of the morning. And then in the afternoon I cried, and then when I went to bed, my pillow was wet with tears. When I woke up the next morning, I knew that I could either tough it out, wait for you, and be together when you came back, or I could refuse to accept it and begin resenting you. Wish I could say that I chose the former, but I let the hurt simmer into bitterness. At first I thought it was only a little, and that it would pass, but it only got worse. When he arrived at her door the night after his return, it was cold, colder than he ever remembered. He shivered from the bitter, bitter chill, but also from the deep sense that something was much more wrong than he could put his finger on. He had knocked on the door, but when she opened it, she didn't embrace him. She didn't invite him inside. She just stared at him, her eyes narrow, narrower than usual, even for Tilly, her lips pressed together. He looked at her, tried to smile, and said, "I missed you." No response. I tried calling you several times. Still nothing from her. Finally, he looked at the bouquet, then held it out to her. I got these for you because I was thinking about you the whole time I was gone. She took the flowers from his hand and looked at them for a long time. Then, without a word, she thrust them down, bouncing off the porch and landing amid the frozen garden. She pushed his chest, not enough to move him, but to enough to make him think about it. That's what I think of your stupid flowers. She looked down at them, then raised her eyes back to him. I don't ever want to see you again. Don't come back. She turned and slammed the door. He stood there for perhaps a minute, but the cold overwhelmed him. He silently drove home, but even when he closed the door to his place, there was a chill that had nothing to do with the outside. By the end of the week following Thanksgiving, I was convinced you never felt anything for me. By the end of the second, I was convinced you had been playing me for a fool. I should say that only part of me believed those things. There was a tiny, persistent voice that kept saying, that's not true, and that part of me did know. You hadn't left to hurt me. It was to deal with your life, and you had promised to come back. But I spent the third week thinking of all the things I would say to you, how I had seen your game, how I had figured all your tricks out. He had put the letter aside after the long, painful read. It told him all that he had suspected. It had openly confirmed all his worst fears. She had convinced herself of all kinds of untrue things, and she never even gave him a chance. The grief and emptiness came rushing back to him. He closed his eyes, but for some reason what came to mind was Buster, her beloved hound dog. He had visited her one day and found her eyes red with tears. It's Buster. I haven't seen him in 2 days. He's never been gone this long. She had cried all morning, and it was all he could do to comfort her enough to get her to put her arms around his shoulders and wet his shirt with her tears. He's never been away this long. He's run off, but he's always come back. Maybe a wildcat got him, or he was hit by a car, or maybe he was eating some poisonous plant and that killed him. Hunter had promised to look for him. She looked at him. Really? You'll go look? He nodded. There was no harm in it. She offered the slightest smile. Thank you. They watched an episode of Friends together, and then he decided to depart. That day in the woods was warm. The leaves had sprouted into full size, but the white flowers of the magnolias had bloomed, dotting the dark green with strips of white. He had followed a path towards the lake. When he got there, he saw the diving platform, like a dock, but not connected to the edge of the lake. Kids would swim out to it. Couples would spend romantic moments together. Jilted lovers had swum out to it in order to reflect. He hasn't thought anything about it until he heard barking. Buster. The hound had swum out to the platform. However, it didn't have courage to swim back. Hunter pulled his shoes and socks off, then his shirt, and then pulled his wallet and keys from his pockets. He swam the short distance to the platform. Buster? The dog turned towards his voice. There was recognition. He clung to the platform and coaxed it. Come on, Buster, jump in. The beast hesitated, but as if making a decision it didn't want to think twice about, it jumped into the water. Hunter swam back to the shore, Buster carefully paddling behind him. Eventually, he reached the dry ground and sat down, running his hands through his hair to get the water out. The dog reached the edge, stepped ashore, shook itself as dry as it could, then walked to Hunter, nuzzling him for a moment, then turned aside, looked in the direction of its home, and bounded off, knowing exactly where it belonged. Hunter gathered his things and began also walking back towards Tilly's house. When he reached the backyard, she had the hound in her arms, and she had been crying again. Her blouse and her hair were damp from Buster's still wet fur. Then she saw him, his pants still soaked, barefoot, holding his things. He saw how she looked at him as her recognition set in. You found him! She jumped up and made a beeline for him. Without even a second thought, she wrapped his arms around his neck and pulled him close, this time crying on his bare shoulder. No one else would have gone out looking for him. Then she nuzzled his cheek. But you did. You went out. You found him, and you brought Buster back to me. When you had knocked on the door, all the terrible things I had decided to tell you escaped me, and that tiny voice begged me to put aside my pride, my anger, my misplaced selfishness. You were there. You came back, just as you had promised. But it was too easy to kill the voice. Yet you tried to get through to me. You could feel that something was wrong, And that voice said, "He deserves better than that, you know that." Then you handed me the roses. No one had ever given me roses before. I almost cracked. I almost gave in. You were trying, and perhaps if you had tried just a little longer, I would have. That's not to blame you. You were trying. There was no possible way for you to know what I was thinking or the turmoil I was going through. "Don't let him get away. Grab him now. Never let go," said the voice inside me, but I refused. I tossed the roses down onto the ground. I'm ashamed to tell you that they remained there until the thaw in March. Hunter had thought to crumple the paper up when he was done. He wanted to tear it to pieces. But as he looked hard at the letter and the envelope with it, he found that he couldn't. A voice of his own told him not to. He tried to resist it, but it pressed in his mind harder. Then he saw the handwritten words and gave in. He folded the letter up, placed it back in the perfect envelope, and put it in his pocket. When he got inside, he pulled it out with the keys in his wallet and dumped it all into the little bucket at his door. He walked to the comfortable chair by the large window, his sanctuary. As he looked out, he tried to piece together all that he had taken in. He had loved, and part of her knew that. Part of her had told her that they could have been happy, but she threw it all away. He shook his head to himself. It all hurt more. The envelope stayed in the bucket for 2 months. Then in early September, he had been looking around for a missing CD he wanted. He reached into the little bucket by the door, and he felt the envelope. He pulled it out, remembered, and looked at it once more. It wasn't perfect anymore. It was creased and bent from his wallet and keys falling on it. Day by day, it's not that he had forgotten about it, not really. It was more that when he thought about it, it hadn't occurred to him where he had left it. He carried it to the couch, sat down, and allowed himself to read it all over again. As he went through it, thoughts began to fill his mind. Ideas began to form. Decisions that could be made appeared before him. But the pain was still too raw. The cuts had been brief, but they had sunk straight to the heart. The letter had been a notion, a vague idea that maybe there was something that he could accept. The words seemed to imply possibilities. Maybe he wouldn't, but that meant he could. The moment I slammed the door on you, I realized it was the wrong decision. What had I just done? I had told you I never wanted to see you and sent you away. It was too much. I ran to my room and cried into my pillow for hours. I had cried a lot in those 3 weeks, but after I sent you off, my eyes actually went dry. It was so bad I could barely blink my eyes. The pain was so bad, I had to go to the bathroom and soak my face in the sink just to get my eyes to work again. Once I felt half normal again, I sat down right in the bathroom, my back leaning against the sink, trying to gather my thoughts. It was then that Buster walked into the bathroom, pawing at me, moaning a little. He knew there was something wrong, but all that came to my mind was that you had brought him back. You cared enough to rescue Buster, and all the thanks I gave you was to tell you to go away. It was more than I could bear, and I would have gone on crying for even longer. But the tears just weren't there. Even so, I moaned and held Buster and wondered how I could be so stupid. Another month passed, and as he was sitting quietly on the couch one evening, not really thinking about anything, he was still dealing with the dull ache that only slowly seemed to subside. It ached less, but the change had always been imperceptible. He reached toward the end table, vaguely with the notion of grabbing the remote control, but instead his hand fell on the slightly battered envelope once more. He glanced at it, realizing. This time, the cream-colored envelope felt not like a warning, but an invitation. He picked it up and held it in his hands, knowing the contents, and briefly held it to his mouth and nose. That got him thinking back to about a year prior. He had invited Tilly to his office's Halloween party, and she gushed. "I just read Dracula. It was amazing. Can you and I go as Dracula and his vampire Lucy? I would just die for the idea of being your vampire love slave." He had teased her for her pun about dying for the vampire, and she compulsively had slapped his shoulder, then looked at him a little fearfully. She had meant it playful, but she had never done anything like that before. She hesitated, hoping he would understand, but he just smiled and tweaked her nose. "So you want to be my Lucy? I guess you'll have to give me a rundown of the story so I can understand what we're dressing up as." Tilly had smiled with relief and quickly agreed, giving him the rundown of how Dracula had drained Lucy of her blood, killing her off, and then resurrecting her with his evil vampire powers. She was as pale as him, and she would have a dangerous smile on her face. Hunter had nodded, and she asked if he would let her buy the costumes. He agreed, and over the next week she gathered the costume parts, went to his place, and helped him to put his costume on. She hadn't known anyone at the party, but it didn't matter. Everyone had admired her skill at their shared costume, and they had even won Best Couples costume. When they got to his car, she leaned over, wrapped her arms over his shoulders, and laid her head on his shoulder. Tilly had been the stranger, but everyone loved her. Women cooed over her, men asked whom she had come with, and it was her work that had won the little trophy in her hands. He had let her have all the glory. He gave her credit for the costumes. He praised how pretty and how evil she looked, and he never interrupted when everyone talked to her. "You're so wonderful," she had said as they sat in his car. She had leaned over the center console, resting her head on his arm, and raised a hand to his cheek. It had been one of the most romantic moments of their relationship. But then he remembered how it all fell apart. He pulled the letter out from the envelope. The rough spiral side edges had started to flake off. "For 6 months, I've been trying to figure out how to live again. I'm not going to lie, most of the time I can be okay. But there's some time every day where I go back to December. I go back to that moment where I was looking at that bouquet of roses, and I wish I could whisper in that confused girl's ear. I had been so close, I had known that if I had brought those flowers to my nose, taken in the sweet perfume, I might have looked at you again with all the love I had had in the past. I could have thrown my arms around you like I did so many times before, and everything would have been just like it was on Thanksgiving. I might have pulled you into my place out of the cold, cold air and shown you how much I really did love you. How many times have I played over in my mind the way it could have gone? Hundreds, maybe. It's been 6 months, so it's been well over 100 for sure. That day in December doesn't haunt my dreams anymore, but I can't forget it. I don't know how to tell you how much I wish I had done what that little voice had kept telling me to do." Hunter had walked to the kitchen, letter and envelope in hand. All he could see was the useless remorse throughout. She was admitting that, even as recently as June, she still loved him. He couldn't help but wonder if 3 months later she still felt that way. He searched himself, a drive to her place, knocking on the door and waiting for a response. But then that cold day flashed across his memory like a bolt of lightning. Nothing had ever hurt him so much as that. He had been in an almost numb state for weeks, putting on a brave face for work, eating little, sleeping in short stretches. He only told a few friends anything more than that the relationship blew up. It had been too hard. This just made it all the harder. He raised the envelope and hurled it as hard as he could across the kitchen, watching as it harmlessly struck the wall and fell onto the kitchen table with a soft thud. He snorted. It wasn't like he sat there that much anyway. It would be out of his mind as much there as anywhere else. It felt good to take his broken heart out on it. He wandered back to his chair, looking out the picture window until the light had faded into the darkness of night. "I've made a lot of mistakes, even though I'm only 24. Most of them I have made peace with. A few I can regret in a way that only brings me to a sense of shame, rather than pain. Only how I treated you burns inside of me. I had the best man I had ever known, a man that I knew I would never cease to love for the rest of my life, and I had carelessly pushed you away, telling myself lies to satisfy my own selfishness and pride." It was late November. The leaves had been falling for weeks, leaving only a scattering of dried-up brown leaves remaining on the trees in front of Hunter's house. He had been picking up, spot cleaning, just making sure that things were in order before he went to his own parents' house for Thanksgiving this year. He was picking up papers off the kitchen table when his hand rested once more on the letter. This time, without even looking, he instantly knew just what it was. It had quietly haunted him, never completely forgotten, but he was drawn to it. There was a pull on it, as if the ink and paper itself needed him. For a minute, he let his finger run across it, almost as if it stood in her place. He threw away some wrappers and put away a few dishes, then started the dishwasher. But he didn't pick it up, not yet. Instead, he then sat down at the table, picked up the envelope, and pulled the letter out once more, hoping to understand what he needed to do. Perhaps it would have been easier to treat this entire thing as a loss. It would have certainly been easier to cater to my own callous pride and sweep all this under the rug. But I've spent 6 months wondering, regretting, wishing I had done something differently. So this is me swallowing my pride because I can't continue on without letting you know how very sorry I am. There are empty spots on this paper, and by the time you read it, perhaps they'll be slightly discolored because I can't help but cry as I look at the blank pieces of paper. You need to know that there's nothing more in my life that I wish I could take back than the things I did back in December. Hunter looked closely at the paper. Not only were there blank spots that were slightly discolored, there were a few places where the words themselves appeared blurred or slightly smeared. He considered, and then realized Tilly had literally cried on the written words of the letter. There was an ache. He looked at his door and thought hard, but once again, the memories held him back. Thanksgiving weekend was the last time they had been happy together, and now it was almost a whole year later. He had watched as she tossed his flowers aside, and he could see her getting angry again that he showed up so long after she had sent that letter. Or maybe she wouldn't care. Maybe she would be over it all. And besides, there wasn't time. He would be going to his parents' house for Thanksgiving, and no matter how he sliced it, there weren't enough hours to deal with it all. He shook his head. It hurt to decide not to do this, because it felt like this should be it. But he wasn't going to be rejected, or almost worse, left behind because he had waited too long. He didn't have the strength to deal with that and then go on and enjoy Thanksgiving with his parents. He folded up the paper once again, pushed it into the envelope, and then, almost without thinking of it, placed it on the chair in front of that broad window. Then a thought formed into his mind. A walk through the woods would take his mind off all the frustrations, the doubt. He glanced out the window, yes, the brisk air, the cracking leaves, and maybe even passing neighbors would help raise his spirits. He put on his shoes, grabbed a jacket, and without another thought marched out the door and into the cold afternoon. I've been living with this hole in my heart, Hunter. If I have to bear that pain for years, it's just what I deserve. I could have accepted that you needed to go. I could have rejected the pride and the resentment that you didn't do what I wanted. I could have let go whenever I decided it wasn't worth it. We had a brilliant romance. My girlfriends envied me. I had never been so happy in all my life. I thought I had had it all, I did really. But after lying to myself for so long, I thought I was going to be free. But despite being unencumbered by a relationship, I spent the whole time wishing I had what I had thrown away. Thanksgiving had been pleasant, but not wonderful. Hunter smiled when he needed to, enjoyed the time with his family, and made a point to show that he was happy when called upon. But when he was by himself, he wondered. He doubted. He questioned then early on Sunday, the day he would be driving back home. He sat alone, brooding on the enclosed back porch. As the sun rose above the trees, his father appeared. He handed Hunter a cup of coffee. "You have something on your mind," Hunter nodded. His father sat down next to him. "You can't hide things from your mother and me. You've done your best to put on a brave face, but there's something eating away at you." His father watched as the sun peeked over the hills off in the distance. "It's better to face your fears head on, you know. If you're wondering if it's worth it, I'll tell you, if you're wavering, take the risk. You can always bounce back, but you can't go back and do the things you were afraid to do when the chance is gone." Hunter sipped his own coffee. "The chance might be gone now anyway," he murmured. "Maybe so," his father remarked, "but maybe not. You can't know unless you take the risk." The two sat together quietly for a long time, saying a few words one to another. Then the door flew open, and his mother called him to the breakfast table. "I swear," she remarked with a twinkle in her eye, "I don't know what you boys are up to. Speaking your round language, I should think." His father kissed her, and they shared a smile that Hunter couldn't help but see. That night he got home so late that he essentially dropped his bag on the floor and fell onto the bed and was asleep in mere minutes. 2 more weeks passed. Hunter realized it had been a year since she had left him standing out in the cold that night. His father's words lingered, so he went to find the letter once more. After searching a bit, he found the worn and bruised envelope sitting on his chair by the window. He picked it up, sat down, and one last time opened and read through it. "The pain of regret isn't going away. Even if I got everything I wanted, I deserve to regret leaving you out in the cold, at least a little bit, and wasting what should have been the first spring of our lives together. I can't believe I'm writing this, but I did all this to tell you just how much I miss you, how much it hurts that you're not there. If the bridge is burned and there's no hope, I will have to live with that. But I promise you that if you ever gave me that chance again, I would love you like you deserve to be loved. Maybe you hate me and this is all a waste of time, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you all that I wanted you to know. I love you now more than I did when things went right, and I hope you will know that, no matter what happens, I always will. With love, Tilly. It was then, almost exactly 1 full year after she broke his heart, that Hunter had to know. He had to try. He closed his eyes and reflected. He needed a few more days. He needed to think, to build up his courage, to bear the weight of rejection one more time, if it had to be. Each day for almost a week, he would wake up, and it felt wrong. Something inside him said, not quite, almost. He'd think about her, wondering if she still meant those words. Finally, on the morning of December 21st, the solstice, he felt sure. He was strong enough, he was prepared enough. He could handle acceptance, rejection, or even apathy. But he could no longer let the chance slip away. He cleaned up, put on a shirt that she had bought him, and drove to her place. When he reached the house, he pulled up to the curb and climbed out. He walked across the yard and knocked on the door. He heard Buster, but it wasn't the barking that warned of an intruder. It was yapping, pawing at the door, and even running back and forth. She opened the door, looked up, saw him standing there as she had imagined so many times. She gasped as the realization set in. Finally, as the vapors of their breathing mingled in the cold air, she whispered, "It's you."